My name is Sabrina Lowell. I'm 38 years old, a former combat medic, and for the past 5 years, I've been teaching battlefield trauma care at Fort Sam Houston. I've seen blood, sand, smoke, and the inside of too many tents held together by duct tape and prayers. I've held arteries shut with my bare hands. I've dragged soldiers out of wreckage while bullets snapped through the air. I've buried friends, and I've saved strangers. But to my family, I'm just the girl who didn't get married. The girl who used to be pretty before she got so intense. The daughter who ran away to play soldier instead of settling down, buying throw pillows, and giving my mother a reason to host baby showers. Last Thanksgiving, as I sat down at the dinner table, my mother glanced at the insignia on my uniform and muttered under her breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're just pretending, honey. Playing hero doesn't make you one." The cranberry sauce hadn't even hit the table yet. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Years of field training will teach you how to keep your face from cracking. My brother smirked behind his wine glass. My father cleared his throat and changed the subject. I took a sip of lukewarm cider and swallowed everything. My story, my pride, and the need to scream. They never asked where I'd been. They didn't know about the rescue in Kandahar, the medal they mailed me because no one could attend the ceremony. They didn't want to hear that I once kept a child breathing with only a shoelace, adrenaline, and 3 whispered prayers. At that table, I wasn't a medic. I wasn't even a woman with a past. I was just a mistake they didn't know how to style into the family photo. So I smiled. I chewed through stuffing and silence. I wiped the edge of my plate like it meant something. And I told myself again what I've told myself for years. They don't see you. Not because you're invisible, but because they never bothered to look. 6 months later, at a vineyard wedding, someone else looked. Someone whose hand made headlines. He didn't call me worthless, he called me something else, and that's where the story really begins. The house still looked the same. Shutters that hadn't been painted in 5 years, cracks in the driveway that spidered like veins, a rusted garden gnome by the steps that had lost its hat and half its smile. I parked on the street, always on the street, because God forbid my brother's Audi got so much as a dust smudge from someone else's tires. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the porch light flicker like an omen. I wore my uniform that day, pressed sharp, boots polished, pins aligned, not as a statement, not to provoke, but because it was what I wore when I felt most like myself. The front door opened before I knocked. My mother peeked out, eyes dropping straight to the jacket. "Oh," she said, "you wore that." No hello. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and forced civility. The dining table was set. White linens, mismatched chairs, the old turkey platter with a hairline crack near the wing. My father emerged from the den, glanced at my boots, and grunted. "You know you're not on duty anymore, right?" I nodded once. "Still fits." My brother Trevor walked in wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my last deployment's hazard pay. "Well, well," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, like a boss greeting a junior staffer. "Army Barbie reporting for dinner." I looked at the name card on the table. Staff Sergeant S. Lowell. Not Sabrina, not daughter, just the rank, a placeholder. Dinner began with a prayer that thanked God for health, family, and those who make good choices. Subtle. As we passed around turkey and practiced tight smiles, Trevor launched into a story about his startup's IPO prospects. My mother chimed in with updates on her new Pilates instructor. My father explained, for the 5th time, how he once shook hands with a retired senator at the golf club. I cleared my throat and started talking about a little girl named Amira. She was 7, caught in a market blast during a convoy raid. I found her under rubble, 2 ribs broken, eyes wide with fear but not tears. I carried her 3 miles to a field clinic, half on adrenaline, half on instinct. She smiled at me through the pain, I said. Before I got to the part where I sutured her lung in the dark, my mother interrupted. "Let's not talk about violence during dinner, sweetheart." She turned back to her mashed potatoes like I'd never spoken. The silence that followed was louder than any mortar blast. I pushed my plate aside. Even the cranberry sauce looked judgmental. That night, I sat alone on the back steps, under a sky too bright with stars that didn't care who I was. I heard laughter inside. Real, full-bodied laughter. The kind you can only have when you're not haunted. And in that moment I knew. I was the ghost at their table. Not fallen, not dead, just unseen. They always told us to wait for the order. No matter how loud the screaming got, how thick the smoke, or how sharp the gunfire, protocol came first. It was survival, not sentiment. And I believed that. Until Fallujah. It was my third deployment. By then, I'd seen more than enough. Shrapnel wounds, collapsed lungs, burns so deep they erased fingerprints. I'd learned to stay calm when voices cracked over the radio, when the dirt shook, when someone called medic, like it was a final prayer. We were dispatched to support a civilian convoy that had taken a wrong turn. Bad intel, worse timing. By the time we arrived, the place was a firestorm, burned-out cars, mothers screaming, children crawling under twisted metal like mice looking for air. My unit leader was already down, shot-yewed through the thigh, trying to wave evac signals with one arm, while holding pressure with the other. And then I saw her. A girl, maybe 10 years old. Face streaked with dust and blood, one arm hanging limp. She was curled behind an overturned produce cart, clutching something wrapped in cloth. I didn't think. I didn't ask. I moved. The comms were a mess. Static, then a voice. Negative, do not approach the civilians. Unknown threats. Hold position. But I couldn't hold. I reached her in 7 seconds, slid on my knees through gravel and glass. Her eyes locked on mine, full of terror, not for herself, but for the bundle in her arms. A baby, unmoving. I checked the infant first, still breathing, barely. Malnourished, shallow pulse. The girl's forearm was fractured, ribs bruised, but she was conscious. I whispered in broken Arabic, "You're safe. I've got you now." She didn't cry, she just nodded. I radioed for evac coordinates, got nothing, so I wrapped both of them in my jacket and ran. 150 meters of open ground. Gunfire cracking overhead. A bullet tore the strap off my medical kit. Another kicked up dirt at my heels. A Marine laid down suppressive fire from a collapsed Humvee as I darted across. My ribs screamed, my legs shook, but I kept moving. We made it. The Humvee had a stretcher. We stabilized them. They lived. So did I. Barely. Fractured ribs, concussion. A line of stitches along my hip from where shrapnel had grazed me during the sprint. When I woke up in the field hospital, the first thing I heard wasn't a thank you. It was, "Next time, wait for the order." They didn't demote me, just logged a formal warning. Failure to comply with command under combat conditions. Translation? She's unpredictable. Later, someone slipped a folded note under my cot. No name, just 6 words scribbled in pencil. 2 fewer graves because of you. At the bottom, a single fingerprint in dried blood. I kept that note. Not for the glory, not for proof, but because in a world that rewards obedience, I needed a reminder of what justified disobedience felt like. When I came home, I didn't tell my family. They wouldn't have asked. And even if they had, I doubt they'd have understood. The envelope was thick. Cream-colored cardstock, silver embossing, the kind of paper that practically whispers, "You're lucky to be included." My name was typed across the front in a font too elegant to be sincere. Staff Sergeant Sabrina Lowell Nayus. Dear Sabrina. No sis. Just rank and last name, like I was being summoned, not invited. Inside, the invitation was equally polished. Trevor's wedding, Napa Valley, mid-spring, black tie optional, RSVP by the 10th. There was a printed itinerary, rehearsal dinner at a vineyard estate, ceremony overlooking the valley, brunch the next morning hosted by the bride's family. It read like a brochure for curated perfection. I stared at the envelope for nearly an hour. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what it meant. They were inviting the idea of me. The convenient version. The clean-cut silhouette who wouldn't wear boots, wouldn't speak of wounds, wouldn't remind anyone that the world wasn't as pretty as their floral arch. I could hear my mother's voice already. "Don't make a scene. Wear something soft." Try to smile this time. But I had already learned that erasure often comes dressed as politeness, so I made a decision. I would go. But not for them. I booked a flight, rented a car, and unpacked the same dress uniform I hadn't worn since a former teammate's funeral. Polished every pin until it gleamed, pressed the creases sharp enough to cut. Not because I needed attention, because I wouldn't leave parts of myself behind just to make other people comfortable. When I stepped out of the rental car at the estate, the valet hesitated. His eyes flicked from my medals to my face, then down to the boots that tapped against imported stone. Thank you for your service, he stammered. I nodded. You're welcome. Inside, the venue looked like a dream. Marble floors, vines wrapped around white columns, music floating on the air like perfume. Every corner was manicured and posed for photographs, and I was not part of that picture. Not really. The first words out of my mother's mouth, when she saw me, weren't hello or welcome, just, "Oh, you wore that?" Her gown was dove gray, hair swept into a bun, pearls at her neck. Her mouth twitched, but the smile never made it to her eyes. I answered without raising my voice. I didn't see a dress code that excluded national service. She flinched, just slightly, then recovered with a sigh. Well, we just didn't want to draw too much attention. It's Trevor's day, after all. Of course. Wouldn't want a decorated veteran drawing focus from the guy with the app that predicts wine pairings. My father handed me a glass of champagne I didn't ask for. The photographer barely looked at me, and when the bride's mother leaned in and said, "We were told you're some kind of doctor. How noble," I corrected her. "I'm not a doctor. I'm a combat medic." "Oh," she blinked. "Like an army nurse?" "No. Like someone who stops bleeding in open fire with one hand while holding a rifle in the other." She went pale. I smiled, just enough to make her nervous, then walked away. The ceremony was set outside, under a silk-draped arch trimmed with white roses and eucalyptus. Rows of white chairs stretched down the aisle, perfectly aligned like they'd been measured with a ruler. Everything about it was symmetrical, soft, expensive. Except me. I took my seat in the second row. Beside me was an empty chair with no name card, no cushion, just space. A silent suggestion. A buffer. No one made small talk. Not the cousin on my left adjusting his cufflinks. Not the college friend on my right checking her phone for the fourth time. They all knew who I was. They just didn't know how to act around it. I watched as guests filtered in. Glittering dresses, velvet suits, laughter that never quite reached the gut. I scanned the crowd for faces I remembered, but most looked away too quickly or smiled too hard, like I was a stranger they had to accommodate. The quartet began playing a soft classical piece. I didn't know the name. I never cared much for background music when lives were bleeding out. Then came the bride, delicate, glowing, everything a Pinterest board could hope for. Trevor stood tall at the altar, jaw tight, hands clasped. He spotted me, just for a second. A flicker in his eyes, not pride, not joy, not even irritation, discomfort, like I was a variable he couldn't account for. This was his curated day, and I was a glitch in the theme. I didn't flinch. I sat still, back straight, boots planted. I didn't clap when the officiant made the joke about commitment. I didn't cry during the vows. I didn't need to. After the ceremony, guests moved inside for the reception. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, waitstaff in starched white jackets gliding like clockwork. I made my way to the table assigned to extended family. Again, no name card, just a folded tent with my rank. Dinner was plated salmon, asparagus, truffle risotto. I cut the fish with practiced precision and ate in silence while the others gushed about vineyard tours and yoga retreats. Then dessert arrived. Mango mousse, artfully swirled, topped with edible gold. Everyone took photos. I ate mine without a word. That's when the cousins descended. "So, what do you actually do?" one of them asked while sipping a cocktail far too pink for sincerity. I looked at him. Not coldly, not kindly, just directly. I triage trauma cases in war zones. I decide who gets to live. I hold arteries shut with my hands. I teach medics how not to die in the field. I've memorized the human skeleton in 4 languages. That's what I do. They stared. Then one laughed nervously. Damn, I thought you were just mad all the time. That's kinda badass. I nodded. It is. They didn't ask anything else. They didn't have the vocabulary. So I stood, excused myself, and stepped out to the edge of the veranda. The night was cool, and the breeze smelled faintly of lavender and crushed pride. Behind me, the laughter started again. Comfortable, curated, untouched. But I didn't feel alone. Not this time. Because something in the air had shifted, and it wasn't over yet. I had just stepped away from the veranda when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and the air shifted. Standing behind me, flanked by 2 Secret Service agents, was a man every American has seen on a screen at least once. Gray at the temples, eyes tired but focused, presence that made a room hold its breath. The Commander-in-Chief. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. Then he extended his hand. Your Staff Sergeant Sabrina Lowell? Yes, sir. He didn't let go immediately. He looked at me like he already knew everything. I've read your file, he said. You've saved more lives than most commanders I've served with. I've wanted to meet you for a long time. The room behind me went silent. Glasses mid-air. Forks paused mid-bite. I didn't look at them. I only heard my mother's breath catch. He turned slightly toward the crowd. She didn't just serve. She innovated battlefield triage. Because of her, survival rates in certain combat zones increased by nearly 40%. That's not just brave, that's genius under fire. I felt my lungs tighten. Not out of pride, out of stillness. The kind you get when the world finally names the thing you've always known but were never allowed to say. Someone clapped, then another. But it was the silence behind me, the stunned, guilty silence of family, that hit the hardest. The president smiled, leaned in, and said, Expect a call soon. We could use minds like yours in policy. And just like that, he was gone. But he left something behind. Not just the photo they snapped of us, not just the gasp my father let slip, but a new stillness, a seismic pause in the room, a reckoning. I turned slowly. Trevor was pale. My mother's hand trembled around her wineglass. My father looked at his shoes like they held answers. And I stood still, polished boots on marble. Because this wasn't vengeance. It wasn't payback. It was proof. Spoken loud enough for those who had never once asked to finally hear. The photographer called for the family photo. I took a step back, instinctively. It was habit by now. Make yourself small, convenient, easy to crop out. But then he looked up and said, Excuse me, miss, are you the soldier? I nodded once. We need you front and center. The words hung in the air. Everyone turned. My mother opened her mouth to object, but then stopped. Because the president, who was still lingering by the dessert table, stepped forward again. He gestured toward me with an easy grin. I think this family's most decorated member belongs in the middle, don't you? No one said a word, so I stepped forward, slowly, calmly. I stood where I'd never been asked to stand, between Trevor and my mother, beneath a sky that had no idea what it was watching. The flash went off, and just like that, the picture was taken. But it wasn't about the photo. Later that evening, as laughter floated out from the tent and the lights dimmed into golden haze, I stood on the edge of the vineyard alone. My mother approached quietly. She didn't meet my eyes, just looked down at my boots. Her hand trembled as it reached out, brushed mine. I didn't know, she whispered. I looked at her, steady. You never asked. She nodded. Not apology, just truth. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't need to. Because something had shifted, not in them, not entirely, but in me. In the weeks that followed, I received messages, recruits, nurses, strangers, people who'd seen the story, who asked how to become what I'd become. Even Trevor wrote, I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Forgiveness doesn't always need an audience. One morning in class, a new recruit raised his hand. Ma'am, are you the one from the video? I smiled. Yes, But right now, I'm the one grading your bandage, so wrap it again." They laughed, and I laughed too. Not politely, fully. Because I finally believed it. I was never worthless, just unseen. And now, I see myself.